Called L9, ordinance recognizing the historical nature of Victory Park and Market House and preserving Victory Park's memorial purpose. May I have a motion? Mr. DiNardo.
Make a motion that we accept the changes to the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. May I have a second? Mr. Kelch?
Second.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonson?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present?
On fire. Dave didn't waste any time. He didn't hesitate. He ran up to the burning car. He grabbed the unconscious person out, drug him to safety, and basically, saved their life. And he did that to a person that just risked his own life, risked Dave's life, and innocent people on the roads. It was a great job. So Dave, if you could come forward and accept this medal, this award. Very proud of you. You did a great job. Thank you, sir. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Kramer.
Hey, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
Yeah, do you think a few council members could say a few things? Or?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, Chief Kramer and Officer. Yeah,
Photo
wait till they get the
Photo op. Chief Kramer.
Yeah, Officer. Yeah, we just want to say a few words if we can. But we just want to thank you very much for bringing this to our attention.
Sure.
And letting us know. I think all of us appreciate the high quality that the Norwood Police Department puts out there, and just really appreciate that. And also just, of course, Officer Town as well. We didn't say anything at the last meeting, but, I think all of us can just say we just very much appreciate everything you all do. So
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
I'm assuming this is the one on Paddock.
Yeah, I think it was Paddock. Yeah.
So you guys got the new pull buttons put in your vehicles.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
thanks again. Thank you all.
Thank you. Moving on, we have two requests this evening to address council. First one, Len Ellis.
My name is Lynn Ellis. I live at 4630 Baker Avenue. Let me start by saying I understand that the redevelopment plan for Victory was accepted by council and no other action has been taken. It does not mean anything in it will be used. That being said, I asked for and received the letter from the Board of Norwood Together. I already had Resolution 6, which council approved. This resolution contained the Montgomery Road redevelopment plan that Norwood Together submitted. Their letter states that the confusion stemmed from the architectural image that was in a preliminary draft of the plan. I would think that if you submit a plan for use, it is the final plan. Looking at the plan submitted to council on page 7 of the plan entitled Victory Park Vicinity, there is a rendering that clearly depicts the monument moved to the U.S. Bank side of the park. In fact, it's next to the bank's back parking lot. They say it was left in inadvertently. I don't buy that. Why would you pay for that particular rendering if it doesn't reflect your preference? I wouldn't waste my money or grant money, which is taxpayer money, on something that doesn't represent my intentions. Just because it's all conceptual and only the plan itself was accepted, doesn't mean a future council might not pick it up and use some or all of it. In fact, the Board of Norwood Together letter states that on page 5 of their redevelopment plan, that the city is in talks with potential vendors that could utilize the old Safety Lane Market House building. Is that true? If so, what vendors and who in the city? In their letter, they stated that it was up to interpretation. Well, I'm not sure how you would interpret their concept with a legend or a key that depicts the monument moved without the cannon and the tank. I was born at night, but I wasn't born last night. I understand exactly why the veterans are upset. It was upsetting to me. I have a family member's name on that monument. He died in the Battle of the Bulge in World War II. I also understand that the vets don't want alcohol use in the park. I'm not sure why any group promoting family activities finds it necessary to have alcohol anyway. I'm also confused that ASAP, which is the drug and alcohol prevention aimed at activities that keep kids from using, would advocate use of alcohol in any family activities in the parks. I understand that Victory is in need of updating and maintenance. I have no issue with that. I think most of us want all of our parks to be updated, maintained, safety issues addressed, and used by our families. This group only represents about 1% of the population in Norwood, so there are many residents that may not like their plan or the memorial being messed with. This type of group comes and goes and has come and gone from Norwood many times, and we long-timers are always left dealing with the aftermath. I say let's make this park and the old Safety Lane a historical place, building, much like the schools did for the old high school. The Safety Lane was built in 1905, which is even earlier than the old high school. There are grants for historical building repairs. I am asking council to protect Victory Park, including the old Safety Lane. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Ellis. We have one more request this evening. Pastor Sonny James.
Pastor Sonny James, 1830 Hopkins Avenue, Norwood, Ohio. First, I want to commend our police department for recognizing another officer who, as the chief said, even did his job at the risk of maybe personal harm. So we salute heroes like that every day, all day, and we appreciate his service and his family granting him the privilege to serve our community. I want to stand before you. I've shown a couple of our council members today a live photo. Jim Shelby with our health department recently came by my home, and he shared with me that there was another business that was potentially standing to be cited, and for apparent legitimate reasons. And so he asked for my partnership. And so as I showed photos to verify with a couple of our council members today, I was able to go by that business and actually, which I showed the end result, cleaned up the mess. I showed photos of my sons loading a dumpster in my vehicle and actually going and eradicating the issue. And the place looks beautiful. Why do I come to city council to share this testimony, as I call it? Real simple. We oftentimes have residents in Norwood, for many different reasons, have legitimate, from what they believe to be legitimate complaints. My challenge to us as a city, though, is oftentimes the way we go about things further give folks reason to believe that it is time for reformations here, even in Norwood, because of the generations and decades of how people, especially people of color, have been treated. I want to celebrate with you that as a result of that, there was no citation needed, there was no problems. If any of you have any questions, you're free to see those pictures. Jim, I asked him, I said, would you be afraid to take a photo? Because we often know in Norwood, especially with our administration, especially when they feel they have power to do what they want, how they want, steal ideas, never say I'm sorry, never say my bad, never acknowledge the realities. Oftentimes, those that do come forward to say, I want to do the right thing, oftentimes, people don't do that because of maybe fear of the administration or fallout. As most of you know, that doesn't budge me. Never has, never will, under any terms, over my dead body. But what I want to celebrate today is, folks, if we come together, I know you all have a job to do, but look around the country, and even as we approach a situation with another minority-based business, it's never too late. It's never too late to right the storm. It's never too late to change a course. And even when someone is wrong, in this particular case, you know why that business had trash stashed up all over the place? Because Rumpke, somehow, after 4 requests, still to this day, haven't delivered a dumpster. So since they have a small business, where else can they keep their trash? They can't keep it when they have women and children sitting in there getting their hair done and trying to beautify themselves with trash stenching all over them. So there's no other place but outside. And folks, this is just evidence and proof. When we come together as one and just talk to each other, not send the police by, because you know many people see that as a move of aggression towards them. And I pray, especially with what we have going on, like with Stonies, guys, I pray we just sit back and look at the total picture before we proceed, simply because there are many, many people that are believing it's time for Norwood to also get its just due, even in the legal perspective. Why would we go through that and waste that money unnecessarily when we can just talk and we can work it out? God bless you all. I'm still trusting we're going to work together in all matters. You'll have to prove me different. God bless you all. Continue to be safe. God bless your families.
Moving forward to item 8, reports of standing committees of council. Committee of the Whole, June 15th, 2021. Committee report, Committee of the Whole, date 6/22/21, to the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, Ohio. We, your Committee of the Whole, to whom was referred, team call with civic clerk and update on county methods report. Beg leave to submit the following report. The Committee of the Whole conducted a Teams meeting with Hannah Meadows and Jillian Algier of the civic clerk to discuss the agenda management system. The presentation was made, and council asked questions and were satisfied and gave verbal approval. A copy of the contract was submitted to the law department to review. The second item of discussion was the report on accounting methods. Council agreed that the process needs to be expedited and asked the law department to produce a resolution expressing council's intention to work collaboratively to quickly satisfy all outstanding requirements to end the fiscal emergency. Respectfully submitted, Ken Miracle, Chairperson. Mr. Bonzel, Mr. Braden, Mr. Bernardo, Mr. Gabbard, and Mr. Jersey, Mr. Kelch, Mr. Thompson. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Motion to accept and file the committee report.
Motion by Mr. Braden to receive and file. Mr. Kelch.
Second.
Second by Mr. Kelch. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Tracy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to Finance, Budget, and Audit Committee meeting, June 21st, 2021. Mr. DiNardo.
Yes. To the Honorable Council of the City of Norwood, we, your Committee of Finance, Budget, and Audit, to whom was referred police body cameras and the uses of American Recovery Act funding, beg leave to submit the following report. Chief Kramer of the Norwood Police Department discussed the urgent need for 24 body cameras and to have them moved to Axon for cloud-based storage and improved video retrieval. The cost is $45,000 for year one and $20,700 for years 2 through 5. All agreed with the urgency and its priority and decided it best to utilize Fund 11, which had available unencumbered balance. As for the American Recovery Act funding, the bulk of the fund should cover the approximately $2 million for radio read water meters, and we discussed how hopefully that price was inflated. Other packages and bid portfolios will come to council from the Safety Service Director and the Public Works Director in the coming weeks and months. Respectfully submitted, the Finance, Budget, and Audit Committee.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we receive and file the report.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo to receive and file the report. May I have a second? Great.
Second.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to third reading of ordinances and resolutions, item J1. An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of not to exceed $8 million of urban renewal refunding revenue bonds, Series 2021 Linden Point Project of the City of Norwood, Ohio, pursuant to Chapter 725 of the Ohio Revised Code to secure bonds to be issued by the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority for the purpose of refinancing outstanding obligations of the city issued to finance and refinance the cost of certain public improvements, authorizing a pledge of certain service payments to secure such bonds of the city and Port Authority, authorizing cooperation with the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority to facilitate the refinancing, authorizing and approving related matters, and declaring emergency. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we have the third reading of the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo to have the third reading of the ordinance. Mr. DiNardo.
May I please second?
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? No discussion? Please call.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have the third reading?
An ordinance providing for the issuance and sale of not to exceed $8 million of urban renewal refunding revenue bonds, Series 2021, Linden Point Project of the City of Norwood, Ohio, pursuant to Chapter 725 of the Ohio Revised Code, to secure bonds to be issued by the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority for the purpose of refinancing outstanding obligations of the city issued to finance and refinance the costs of certain public improvements, authorizing a pledge of certain service payments to secure such bonds of the city and Port Authority, authorizing cooperation with the Port of Greater Cincinnati Development Authority to facilitate the refinancing, authorizing and approving related matters, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we approve, or excuse me, I move that we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo to pass the ordinance. Can I have a second? Mr. Geraci.
I'll second the motion.
Second by Mr. Geraci. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo? Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The ordinance passes. Moving on to item J2, ordinance approving a zone change from the heavy manufacturing M2 use classification zoning district to the general business district, GBD, use classification zoning district for the parcels identified by the Hamilton County Auditor as 2699 Edmondson Road, parcel 651-0041-0115-00 and 651-00 1-0041-0381-00. Mr. DiNardo.
Move we have the third reading, please.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have the third reading. Mr. Geraci.
Second the motion.
Second by Mr. Geraci. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have the third reading?
Ordinance approving a zone change from the heavy manufacturing M2 use classification zoning district to the general business district GBD use classification zoning district for the parcels identified by the Hamilton County Auditor as 2699 Edmondson Road, parcels 651-004-1-0115-00 and 651-0041-0381-00.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. Motion to pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Braden to pass the ordinance. May I have a second? Mr. DiNardo.
Yes, please.
Any discussion? Mr. Gabbard.
Just a question through to the law department. Is this something that was just overlooked over all these years? I mean, shouldn't this have been done when they went in?
Mr. Moore.
Yes, absolutely, since it was a restaurant use. But now that it's been closed and they want to reopen, they're not in compliance anymore, so the grandfathering doesn't apply, so they need the zone change. Yeah, it was clearly overlooked at the time.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. Bonzel.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I mean, I'd say also there was when you have a PUD, it is under PUD, right, that parcel? Pretty sure there's a big one over. Yeah, either way, yeah, I mean, when you have the planned unit development district there, as long as the zoning that you need to make whatever use worked, as long as that district touches it in some part of it, then you can use it for other parts as well. So I think the big impetus here is that they want to put a big sign on top of their building, and I don't think they can put that on in the current zoning. I might be wrong about that, but that's what I was told. So I'm looking forward to Ford's Garage opening for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzel. Anyone else? Motion by Mr. Braden, second by Mr. DiNardo to pass the ordinance. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The ordinance passes. Moving on to item J3. Ordinance approving a zone change from the heavy manufacturing M2 use classification zoning district to the general business district, GBD, use classification zoning district for the parcel identified by the Hamilton County Auditor as 2692 Madison Road, parcel 651-0041-0228-00. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we have the third reading of the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonzel to have the third reading. Mr. DiNardo.
Second, please.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have the third reading?
Ordinance approving a zone change from the heavy manufacturing M2 use classification zoning district to the general business district, GBD, use classification zoning district for the parcel identified by the Hamilton County Auditor as 2692 Madison Road, parcel 651-0041-0228-00.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. DiNardo.
I'd like to motion to pass this ordinance.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to pass the ordinance. Mr. Braden. Second. Second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The ordinance passes. Moving on to item J4. Ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as parts of the various component component codes of the codified ordinances for Norwood, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Mr. DiNardo.
Please have the third reading.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have the third reading. Mr. Geraci.
Make a motion, second.
Second by Mr. Geraci. Any discussion? Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Moore, I know we talked about it, but could you speak to, I guess, the concerns that I had that potentially might be like overriding like a local change that we had on some of these
Mr. Moore.
codes?
Yeah, I did take some time looking through it. There's a lot of changes in here. A lot of the motor vehicle ones have to do with a new definition of a new kind of, it's not really a scooter, it's for moving stuff instead of people, but they had to add that. So a lot of the like traffic ones, like add that into it. That's the change. Because in order to get to that, I had to go to, well, I use Lexus, but to go to, okay, here's that section of the Ohio Revised Code. This is changing. We went to our code to figure out what section of the ORC ours was based on, and then go to the ORC and then go to previous editions of the amendment notes to figure out what changed. Most of it's very minor. But the sections that we have, that were covered by this, that we have kind of an individual spin on it. One of them is the prohibited standing or parking, which is how close you can park to a driveway. We may all remember that discussion going back 20 years, actually. The code application to bicycles, the cruelty to companion animals, which is the tethering that is specific to ours. Those are the only ones that were included as one of the ones that were one of the sections that were amended. And our specific local changes were retained.
Great.
So these will not undo any of those kind of special tweaks that we've had.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Anyone else? Motion on the floor by Mr. DiNardo, second by Mr. Geraci to have a third reading. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes. Aye. The motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have the third reading?
Ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as parts of the various component codes of the codified ordinances of Norwood, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. DiNardo.
Make a motion that we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to pass the ordinance. May I have a second? Mr. Bonzo.
Second, please.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
All members present voting aye. The ordinance passes. Moving on to item J5, ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as parts of the various component codes of the codified ordinances of Ohio, of Norwood, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. Mr. DiNardo.
Similar to the one we just passed. May I please have the third reading?
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have the third reading. Mr. Braden, second. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have the third reading?
Ordinance approving the editing and inclusion of certain ordinances as parts of the various component codes of the codified ordinances of Norwood, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo to pass the ordinance. Mr. DiNardo.
Second, please.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The ordinance passes. Item K is second reading of ordinance and resolutions. We don't have any this evening, so we'll move on to item L, introductory reading of ordinances and resolutions. Item L1, ordinance authorizing the settlement of a claim by Christine Gideon and declaring an emergency.
Mr. President.
Mr. Moore.
Thank you. Maybe out of turn, just asking that council, if it is council's desire, that passing this tonight would be a great service to it.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Mr. DiNardo.
May I please have all three readings?
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have all three readings. Suspend the rules and have all three readings. Mr. Brady. Second. Mr. Nardo?
Yep, the decision to have all three readings follows a meeting that we had to discuss the matter already. So I think there's there is a sense of urgency about this.
Thank you, Mr. Nardo. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. DeRacy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have all three readings?
Ordinance authorizing the settlement of a claim by Christine Gideon and declaring an emergency.
All three readings.
Oh, sorry. Ordinance authorizing the settlement of a claim by Christine Gideon and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the settlement of a claim by Christine Gideon and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. DiNardo?
Motion to pass the ordinance, please.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to pass the ordinance. Mr. Kelch? Second. Second by Mr. Kelch. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. DeRacy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to item L2. Ordinance creating and establishing Norwood Fund 2095, American Recovery Act Fund, and declaring an emergency. Mr. DiNardo?
May I please have all three readings?
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have all three readings. Mr. Braden? Second. Second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Mr. DiNardo?
The reason for asking for all three readings is because this would be important to establish the fund. Particularly, this is different than the CARES Act fund that we set up already. The difference here is there's a new administration, so they called it a new name, and that fund requires us to have a new name. This will go to Anna Mary by the auditor, or the state of Ohio by the auditor this week. So it would be good from a timing perspective if we could pass this, if you guys wish.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. DeRacy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have all three readings?
Ordinance creating and establishing Norwood Fund 2095, American Recovery Act Fund and declaring an emergency. Ordinance creating and establishing Norwood Fund 2095, American Recovery Act Fund and declaring an emergency. Ordinance creating and establishing Norwood Fund 2095, American Recovery Act Fund and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. DiNardo?
Move that we pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to pass the ordinance. May I have a second? Mr. DeRacy?
Second the motion.
Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. DeRacy?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to item L3, ordinance authorizing the clerk treasurer to certify unpaid bills for the cost of grass cutting to the Hamilton County Auditor for filing as a lien on the tax duplicate of the owner or owners of said parcels and to be collected as other taxes and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we have all three readings of the ordinance.
We have a motion by Mr. Bonzo to have all three readings. May I have a second? Mr. Tracy?
I'll second the motion.
Any discussion? Mr. DiNardo?
To any of my council members or to folks who know, is there a time sensitivity to this? Is there a reason why all three readings would be important?
It'd be best not placing the liens for the grass cutting on this property. So if we can get the money back based on the liens, that'd be best.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you, Mr. President. I mean, I will say the health department, when they submitted it, they requested that we try to get this done. I think Mr. Tracy is right in the sense that if one of these properties were to the next few months, it's better for it to be on there so that everybody knows that the lien is there, instead of it being added at a later date. It actually could hurt the buyer because they may not know the lien's coming, and they bought the property, and all of a sudden, they've got a $247 lien on their house.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Mr. Bond. Anyone else? Mr. Gabbard?
Just to make note for those at home, this is not in any particular area. There's 20 of them listed here, and it covers all 4 of our wards, so it's not like just one little spot in Norwood that we're having issues with these type of things. It's throughout the whole city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have all 3 readings, please?
Ordinance authorizing the clerk/treasurer to certify unpaid bills for the cost of grass cutting to the Hamilton County Auditor for filing as a lien on the tax duplicate of the owners of said parcels and to be collected as other taxes and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the clerk/treasurer to certify unpaid bills for the cost of grass cutting to the Hamilton County Auditor for filing as a lien on the tax duplicate of the owners of said parcels and to be collected as other taxes and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the clerk/treasurer to certify unpaid bills for the cost of grass cutting to the Hamilton County Auditor for filing as a lien on the tax duplicate of the owners of said parcels and to be collected as other taxes and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Geraci?
Make a motion to pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Geraci to pass the ordinance. Mr. Kelch?
Second.
Second by Mr. Kelch. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
All members present voting aye. The ordinance passes. Moving on to item L4, resolution adopting 2022 tax budget and declaring an emergency. Mr. DiNardo?
I would make a motion to have all 3 readings.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to have all 3 readings. Mr. Brady? Second by Mr. Brady. Any discussion? Mr. Bonzo?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I mean, as I think we point out every year, I mean, essentially this just matches the fiscal recovery plan that the council's already passed. So it's just the process that the state set up where we have to work with our county auditors to get it done tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo? Mr. Braden?
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. All 3 readings, Mrs. Williams.
Resolution adopting 2022 tax budget and declaring an emergency. Resolution adopting 2022 tax budget and declaring an emergency. Resolution adopting 2022 tax budget and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we pass the resolution.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo to pass the ordinance. Mr. Brady? Second by Mr. Brady. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
All members present voting aye. Ordinance passes. Moving on to item 5, resolution expressing council's intention to work collaboratively to quickly satisfy all outstanding requirements to end the fiscal emergency. Mr. Geraci.
I'd like to make a motion to have all 3 readings.
Motion by Mr. Geraci to have all 3 readings. Mr. Bonzo.
I'd like to second that motion. Thank you.
Second by Mr. Bonzo. Any discussion? Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. So this resolution essentially just kind of council sending a message just that we want to get a move on, that we feel like based on the testimony that we've heard from the executive officers of the city, the mayor, the treasurer, the auditor, and then the law director, I mean, we think that the city is well on its way to fulfilling almost all of the items in the report on accounting methods. But we also feel like, just based on our committee, the whole discussion, that there is, we're not getting a lot of as much cooperation from the state as we would like. So just so everyone knows at home, this resolution is kind of just saying, us expressing that we kind of want to get a move on it and get out of this thing, because from a budget standpoint, we're in really good shape, but from, they still have to sign off on all these different items. If they don't sign off, we don't know if we have things left to do or not. So
Thank you.
that's kind of where it's coming from.
Anyone else? Mr. Braden?
Oh, thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to hear from either the administration or maybe the law department. Is there any negative connotations maybe that may come from this? Like, I'm all for trying to push as well, as far as trying to move away from fiscal emergency, but is there any negative things that we may be looking for in passing this that you know of?
Mr. Moore?
I would defer to the two members of the fiscal oversight, whatever the heck the committee is. The only downside I can see is they may not like it and decide, I don't like their attitude. Let's go even slower. That's the only thing I can think of, but I just don't know. I will say that I think that what I've seen anyway on the kind of the spreadsheet is like in progress, and I'm not sure exactly what that means. Are we good to go? Like what I think it would be helpful to have. What are the specific things? If we have 5 or 6 or 10, or if we have 2 things, what are the very specific things we need to take care of in order to be able to check off that box and move on? So I would defer to them.
We go first. How dare you pass something like that? I can't believe you would have the audacity. No, I don't think there's anything majorly wrong with this. I do think that there are hoops that have to be jumped through, and multiple times they have to come back and check things. So I don't think that the auditor of state, that they have intentionally slowed things down. I do think passing this does put the pressure on me, on Ken, and on pretty much the members of the commission to keep moving forward rapidly, but I don't know that that's not necessary, or, it's fine with me. I do feel like Keith has worked to get some stuff here recently. I know our office is working to complete some of the other items, and it takes time, but this is not, I don't think this will have a negative effect on it. I think that you talk to the commission members that actually have action items that
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, I would like to share one thing, Mr. Braden. We had a meeting scheduled today, this morning, as a matter of fact, and as you know, to comply with sunshine laws, we have to have the agenda 24 hours prior to the meeting, and they did not comply with that. So unfortunately, we had to cancel today's meeting, which was very disappointing, since I had reached out and asked for the agenda and reminded them that we have to have that 24 hours prior. So the meeting is going to be rescheduled. I haven't checked my email late this afternoon. It's been kind of a fluid thing this afternoon, but we had to reschedule the meeting that was scheduled for this morning. It was a virtual meeting, but still it's disappointing because we really wanted to get some updates. So I feel this is appropriate.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyone else? The motion on the floor by Mr. Geraci, seconded by Mr. Bonzel, to have all 3 readings. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have all 3 readings?
Resolution expressing the council's intention to work collaboratively to quickly satisfy all outstanding requirements to end the fiscal emergency. Resolution expressing council's intention to work collaboratively to quickly satisfy all outstanding requirements to end the fiscal emergency. Resolution expressing council's intention to work collaboratively to quickly satisfy all outstanding requirements to end the fiscal emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we pass the resolution.
Motion by Mr. Bonzel to pass the resolution. Mr. Braden?
Second.
Second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The ordinance passes. Item L6, ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to advertise for bids for a contract for the repair of the Ash Street storm sewer and declaring an emergency. Mr. Bonzo.
Before we have the motion, I just didn't know if we could have the city administration speak to kind of what this is for, and also just kind of the urgency over why this one was picked over like other projects that could have been picked.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Mr. Mayor.
Sure. This has been something that the Safety Service Director has brought to my attention last year, a little prior to that. But we have galvanized pipes that do a lot of the stormwater removal from ash under the Norwood lateral and then across. And we replaced one of them. We had to shut down a lane, you might recall, on the Norwood lateral where we replaced one that was close to the doggy spot, and we had to do a lot of work there. This is another one that just through all the years has worn down to nothing, and now it is huge sinkholes. It's actually in the island area, right as the two, you've got one entrance ramp and one exit ramp, and it's in the island area right there. You can even see where the ground is caved in. It's just going to get worse. And it was something that he would have liked to have gotten completed last year, but we couldn't make it happen within the budget, so that's what this is about.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Anyone else? Mr. Kelch.
Thank you, Mr. President. Though we all know I'm consistently going to always encourage the administration to bring the same kind of thing across our desk for Elm Avenue. I was able, in a meeting I had earlier, I was able to talk to Clint Zimmerman. I even asked him about this one and kind of his thoughts on it, and there is some serious caving in issues going on there, so this is something that we really need to look at quickly, and that's just the vibe I got from it, so I will be supporting this.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Mr. Mayor.
I would ask that we have all three readings so that we can move forward with this. It's going to it takes a considerable amount of time to put together the bid package and then get the bids and then get the contractors and finally get the contractors working on it. So if we don't, I know it seems like we're just getting into summer, but it'll be the end of summer and fall before we're even close to this. So.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Anyone else? So, Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I would move that we have all three readings of the ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Mr. Braden?
Second.
Second by Mr. Braden. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have all three readings?
Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to advertise for bids for a contract for the repair of the Ash Street storm sewer and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to advertise for bids for a contract for the repair of the Ash Street storm sewer and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to advertise for bids for a contract for the repair of the Ash Street storm sewer and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Braden.
A motion to pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Braden to pass the ordinance. Mr. DiNardo?
Second, please.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, voting aye, the ordinance passes. Moving on to item L7, ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to advertise for bids not to exceed $70,000 in total with a general contractor and/or subcontracting firms for the renovation of the Norwood Police Academy building and declaring an emergency. Mr. Geraci.
I'd like to make a motion to have all three readings.
Motion by Mr. Geraci to have all three readings. Mr. Kelch.
Second.
Second by Mr. Kelch. Any discussion? Mr. Geraci.
Just a question, if somebody can answer. Is this to also get the
gun range back operational.
Mr. Mayor?
The gun range has been, they've been using the gun range for the last 6 months. So
Okay.
it's operational at this time,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Geraci. Anyone else? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have all 3 readings?
Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to advertise for bids not to exceed $70,000 in total for a general contractor and/or subcontracting firms for the renovation of the Norwood Police Academy building and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to advertise for bids not to exceed $70,000 in total with a general contractor and/or subcontracting firms for the renovation of the Norwood Police Academy building and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to advertise for bids not to exceed $70,000 in total with the general contractor and/or subcontracting firms for the renovation of the Norwood Police Academy building and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Braden.
Motion to pass the ordinance.
Motion by Mr. Braden to pass the ordinance. May I have a second? Mr. DiNardo.
A second, please.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any further discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The ordinance passes. Moving on to item L8, ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to advertise for bids for the Norwood Water Meter Replacement and Integration Project, including remote read and data collection software and hardware, and declaring an emergency.
This came up in the finance committee last month, and we were talking about the need to utilize some of the funding from the American Recovery Act. Because this allows the administration debt, and moving to make good on that which we talked about last night, was connected.
Anyone else? Mrs. Williams, please call the roll.
Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to advertise for bids for the Norwood Water Meter Replacement and Integration Project, including... Oh, I'm sorry.
You're good. You're getting,
You guys had me on a roll, man. All right, Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
all members present voting aye. Motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have all 3 readings?
Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to advertise for bids for the Norwood Water Meter Replacement and Integration Project, including remote read and data collection software and hardware, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to advertise for bids for the Norwood Water Meter Replacement and Integration Project, including remote read and data collection software and hardware, and declaring an emergency. Ordinance authorizing the Safety Service Director to advertise for bids for the Norwood Water Meter Replacement and Integration Project, including remote read and data collection software and hardware, and declaring an emergency.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. DiNardo.
Make a motion, we pass this ordinance.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to pass the ordinance. Mr. Geraci.
I'll second the motion.
Second by Mr. Geraci. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The ordinance passes. Moving on to item L9. Ordinance recognizing the historical nature of Victory Park and Market House and preserving Victory Park's memorial purpose. Mr. Gabbard.
Make a motion, we have the first reading.
Motion by Mr. Gabbard to have the first reading.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
I second that.
Second by Mr. DiNardo. Any discussion? Mr. Kelch.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would have liked to have all 3 readings tonight and pass this here tonight. The reason being, this ordinance, to me, is a good thing for our city. I'm not sure this time what is controversial in this ordinance about protecting war veteran memorials by recognizing the historical nature of property that we hold as a city. I'm not understanding what's so controversial about that. This ordinance is meant to show appreciation and respect for our Veterans Association that has maintained this park, has ensured that this park is a good success for our city, something not an eyesore. And it includes the Market House, being that it's still inside that parcel. And when you pull up that address, that's what pulls up Victory Park. This is the Market House address. And I mean, that's quite a historical property we have as well. As pertaining, in our committee last night, there was talk pertaining to alcohol use in the park. According to Ordinance 561.03 on our books already, there's no alcohol use permitted there as it is. So this isn't taking anything away. It's only cementing what we already have on the books and the wishes of the veterans. So again, it's not hurting anything that's not already in place. So I would, again, like to ask Mr. Gabbard to amend his motion to have all 3 readings. I think this is something that we can do together as a council, something good for the city, something good for our veterans group, and it's something good for them instead of something that's good for our personal opinions, as we're here for the residents in our city, not just ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kelch. Mr. DiNardo.
Mr. Kelch, the reason for me wanting to, or seconding the first or single reading was because the original ordinance that we saw had language in section 3 that was problematic to myself and Eric Thompson. We talked last night about how you addressed that for me and actually satisfied that concern. Eric wasn't here, or Mr. Thompson wasn't here for the Parks Committee, and he wasn't here for the meeting today. So I think, given that he was one of the 2 people that expressed concern about that specific language, I think passing having one reading and letting him see those changes would make everyone comfortable, since he was the one who had a problem with it too. That's why I'll be having one reading.
Thank you, Mr. DiNardo. Mr. Gabbard.
Thank you, Mr. President. The reason I asked for one reading, I think this is an example of an ordinance that needs to have all 3 readings, so people can come and express. They have 3 different times to come and share. Spoke with Mr. Hockney, who's in the audience tonight. He said, and asked him if he was going to speak on this. He said no, but if it's passed tonight, then no. But if not, he'd like to come back and speak. And so I think that's the reason I did it, to give people the opportunity to come and speak on this, show support, and then for people also, when we have 3 readings, it gets more attention, and that's what this needs. It's just so we can get more attention out there, so people understand the severity and how serious we take this park. And so I commend you guys on putting this together. I just think that this is the example of why we would want to have 3 readings.
Thank you, Mr. Gabbard. Anyone else? Motion by Mr. Gabbard, second by Mr. DiNardo to have the first reading. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Mrs. Williams, may we have the first reading?
Ordinance recognizing the historical nature of Victory Park and Market House and preserving Victory Park's memorial purpose.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Moving on to item M, administrative reports. Mayor Snyder.
Thank you, President Miracle. Some good things to report. Indian Mound, Sheridan, and Wakefield, that project is moving along. There's been considerable work already accomplished. Robertson and Forest Avenue, both of those repaving projects are well underway. So, and the goal was to have all of that, make sure that all of that was completed prior to school starting back up. So they started after school ended, and they're working on it now, so we should be in good shape with that. Painting on Montgomery Road is still underway. It's not completed. They got pulled off a lot for rain and different things, but there's still stop lines. There's still some different lines that need to be taken care of there, but that'll continue. And then the preventive maintenance of the streets. So when we did the street study, the street survey, there were many streets that were on there that were listed that needed to have crack filling, need to have preventive maintenance to maintain the surface and make them last longer. And Clint has contracted with a company that will come in and take care of those preventive maintenance items that were brought up. We do have in the budget that you guys passed, we have funding for a tar buggy, but this is a company that can come in and knock a lot out very quickly. So we'll be doing that. I did see the internally within the administrative staff to talk about the plans that we have for streets and what plans were already in place and we just continue moving forward with, but other plans for the next few years. And I think JMA will be providing us some information to share with council members in the future, and then we can really start looking at what's being allocated out for the next few years as we move forward. We do know that Montgomery Road, Ohio Public Works Commission is looking at Montgomery Road being repaved in 2023. So it's a few years away, but that's okay. We'll take it. Our push is not to do Montgomery Road in 3 phases over 3 years. Our push is going to be to do Montgomery Road from Corp Line to Corp Line. So that's the goal, to really hit it hard. We also had a meeting today with the Hamilton County Development, and this is the administrator who takes care of the community development block grant funding. So there is funding in place. I mean, we're using money from the community development block grant for the Forest Avenue and Robertson repaving that's going on. There's a amount of money that we've been provided to do sidewalk repairs and to do ADA curb repairs, the corner curbs, making them ADA accessible. We also have funding that you guys put in place for a lot of catch basin repair work to be done, so stormwater repair. So you'll see them out doing that. Clint is up to the challenge. He assured me he's got a lot going on, and he'll be moving forward with that pretty quickly. So it was mentioned that the safety lane, the Norwood Market Building, or the Norwood Boxing Gym, which it was at one time also, has a lot of interest. It definitely has a lot of interest. And there are a lot of people that are talking to me about what can go in there, what should go in there. And I am holding them back at arm's length because I would like to get that building cleared out, and then we'd like to request quotes for what can happen, what can be done in there. And maybe that's a part where, council puts together a committee to take a look at what people's not recommendations. We're not looking really for recommendations. We're looking for organizations that come in and say, this is what we can do in there. This is how we'll make something happen. This is how we'll reactivate it. So it's not, I don't feel comfortable that that's my decision or the administration's decision. It's more of a decision of the community. So it's crazy how that building could sit vacant for so many years as just storage with nobody really interested in doing much to it, to 2 years ago, some people stating some interest in it, and now it's a hot button issue, man. Everybody wants something to do with that market building. So it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see when we do get it to a point where we do get things cleared out of there. It'll be interesting to see the proposals that come forward, and then that'll be a discussion for others. It's not going to be a discussion or a decision that clearly I'm going to be able to make. So that's an important part of it. The other part is that we have a new emergency operations plan that the police department and fire department, the health department, and public works have worked on. That I'd like to save a little bit of time at the next council meeting and bring them in so they can talk you through sort of the process that they used to put this in place. Bring in probably the assistant fire chief and a couple of the lieutenants, police lieutenants worked on that. So maybe next, I would hope that you would plan for maybe a 10-minute presentation on that emergency operations plan at the next council meeting. I think they did some really bang-up job and got us in good shape there. And then the last thing I'll say is this Friday is a double header. I know, John, you like the double headers because of the baseball. This Friday is a double header in the city of Norwood because at Victory Park at the gazebo, the Norwoodians will be playing. They start playing live music from 6:30 to 8:30 at the gazebo. So they always do a great job. They've got some really nice music that they play. And then the double header part is A Midsummer Night's Dream, put on by Shakespeare in the Park, is taking place at Northwoods Park at 7 p.m. So double header. You could go to one, you could go to the other. You're not going to be able to go to both. But both should be really nice events within the city. Double header on Friday. One starts at 6:30, the other starts at 7. And I know I went to the last Shakespeare on the Park that was held up on the lawn at Victory Park, and there were probably 150 people there. It was great to see the amount of people there. Pat DeWine was there, who's now he's a judge, yeah. So interesting to see that. So that's all I had.
Thank you, Mayor Schneider. Any questions or comments for Mayor? Mr. Kelch.
Thank you, Mr. President. Through the chair of the mayor, do we have any updates on Elm, on what we're doing, what we're looking at, through talks with JMA, like anything we can give?
I do not have any updates on Elm. I've been concentrating on streets and a lot of. I will tell you that when the flood alert, recently there was on Saturday, there was the flash flood warnings that went through, and John Murphy called me and we discussed it. He went over and viewed the area, and there were no problems with standing water or flooding at that time. But that's not a solution to the problem, Councilman Kelch. I realize that, and we'll continue. It is still on the top of the pile of things that need to be done, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. So I guess just to follow up on Mr. Kelch's question, if I could, does the city have anything, I'm sure there's probably nothing that could be done, but is there any type of if we know there's going to be some flash flooding, is there any kind of mobile pump or something that we could use to prevent at least the damage that happens whenever there is flooding? Again, there probably is not. I'm just wondering if that's even been looked at or thought of to...
The biggest preventative measures we've been taking is with Public Works, making sure that all of them, that system is open and flowing, and keep making sure that the catch basins are not filled up. We've had problems where it flooded and you found a hubcap down in one of the catch basins. So, it's a matter of preventive maintenance right now to try our best. But that doesn't mean we won't get one of those, they call them 100-year storms, but it seems like we're getting 100-year storms every few years now, so.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Anyone else? Mr. Braden.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to add to this conversation, the other day when we did have these storms, and I call them 30-year storms. I think we're in a 30-year cycle that we are getting more rain. And I was curious the other day, after the rains, and I drove through my ward, and I was looking at all the flooding that was going on, and there was quite a bit. Globe, Hunter, Warren, Ralston, Hunter. We're catching all the water that's coming down from the hill, and there is a substantial amount of flooding that's going on there. And then I was curious about Elm Avenue, so I immediately went straight from where I just spoke, and I went down to Elm, and I didn't see any standing water, like you said, the catch basins. I think that you're exactly right. The catch basins, Public Works are doing a good job at clearing those and keeping them clear, and I didn't see any standing water down there. That's not to say that the problem's fixed. It's not to say water's not going in basements. Water's going in our basements too in Ward 4, and I just wanted to put that out there. And I went from, like I said, I noticed the flooding that I'm having in our neighborhoods, and I went straight to Elm, and I made sure, because I know that's an issue, and I wanted to compare. And quite frankly, we're having more flooding on Warren, Ralston, Globe, Hunter, and then I saw on, not to say that we don't have to fix that, but I just wanted to compare that and bring that up tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Braden. Anyone else? Mayor Steiner.
Just a quick follow-up. I mean, those are things, see, click, fix. If you see something like that, if it is storming, if you do see catch basins that are filled, take a picture, send it in to C-Click, send it in to Public Works, because they will take care of it. And if you are out on a walk through your neighborhood and you see a catch basin that is not in good shape, which happens a lot in the city of Norwood, we have a lot of deferred maintenance, especially when it comes to our stormwater system and the infrastructure that gets it down in there. You know, if you see something that needs help, you guys approved funds to make repairs, and Clint will get the contractors out there to make repairs, but he's got to be made aware of something that, you know, he can't see everything. Please do report those if you see them. Try to get them in the system so that we can make repairs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Any other questions, comments for Mayor Schneider? Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple things I wanted to note. So you'd mentioned the Montgomery Road repaving in 2023. I just wanted to encourage this council and the next council. You know, I think we really need to get the, I guess, what do you count, the traffic configuration right on the road. So whether it's, you know, adding some permanent parking on the sides, if it's reducing lane sizes, if it's adding bump outs in places, if it's going to, you know, kind of shrinking in a few places where you go to that one lane each direction and that center turn lane. You know, I would just encourage, you know, if there's traffic study needs to be done, whatever happens, like that we really get this right before we repave and then have lane markings and down. Because even though maybe the Ohio thing may not pay for those bump outs or for other things, we could probably find money to complement it to really get the road right this time instead of repaving it and then all of a sudden having to dig up. And then the other thing is too, just the intersection at Hopkins and Lawrence and Cameron, it is, in Montgomery Road, of course. You know, I know I've seen some drawings that might be out there, not drawings, but like I've seen some potential like ideas of what could happen there to kind of make that intersection more tighter than what it is now. Right now, it's a massive intersection. I would just encourage that too, just to any of these items, let's try to get this knocked out over this next year and make that repaving project, I mean, the best it can be and really set us up for success for the future. So I'd encourage that. And then the other thing's much more minor. Forest Avenue. So when they repaved it the last time, I was told, I didn't live here at that time, but they put some center lane markings down at that 4500 block. I used to live on the 4500 block, and there's alternate street parking there. So you may consider having them hold those lane markings because there's alternate, basically, sometimes you can park on one side of the street, sometimes you park on the other. So the traffic essentially, in the morning, you're basically kind of on that side more towards Montgomery Road. In the evening, you're on the other side because parking's not allowed on certain sides of the street. So I would encourage you to look at those lane markings as well to see if maybe they're not needed right there because people, it just is confusing when.
Yeah, they were, there was never a double line there. There wasn't one until years, I'll say 10 years ago, they put double yellow lines there, but I don't think that it's restricted parking on either side.
Oh no, it's definitely restricted parking. Now there is, they did just take it out though on the side, the first block of the 4500 block, which is between Robertson and Park, on this side that's closer to Sharpsburg. But yeah, there is still restricted parking on the side of the street. You can't park. I'll just say I've got experience with...
Both blocks or one block, you're saying?
Definitely the block between Kenilworth and Park. That one definitely has restricted parking, and then it's on one side of the other block. So, but I would just, again, if you're not going to put the lane markings down, it's fine. I would just encourage it to not put them down because, again, people park, you're kind of driving depending on how the cars are going.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzel. Anyone else? Mr. Braden.
Thank you. Last thing for me. So you mentioned something about the safety lane and how we are, you're knocking down, people are really interested in that right now. And something you said that something just struck me, that we're looking for partners to really, to make that, to maybe to renovate or restore, to bring it back because it is historical. Is that something that we can't do on our own? Do we have to be partners with somebody, or can Norwood, because that's our building, is that something that we can do, or is that just not feasible that we can do that on our own? We're looking for partners and really funding help? Just curious.
Mr. Mayor?
I'm not sure what you mean, like, we're a government entity. We wouldn't run a business. We wouldn't run a museum.
Well,
We wouldn't-
I understand that, sir. I don't know, it's our building, and I guess we're just looking for somebody to use the building, and we don't have any interest in remodeling that or restoring that back to its, glory and keeping that for ourselves. We're looking for somebody to actually partner with to do that.
Well, they would-
That's all, it's just,
I don't see us selling the building.
okay.
But it would be a user that would have an idea of what they want to
Okay.
do in there, but I'm not sure, we wouldn't, like develop it as an office or develop it
Well,
for something?
I'm not really against any of it. I just am curious on, because you said that we're looking, because you're kind of beating them down and everybody, there's a lot of interest now. And I'm just curious on can we do it as a city, something, I don't know what, but it's our building. We have to have somebody else to come in and, that's all. this is something that's.
I'm not beating anybody down, I'm holding them back.
Okay.
Holding them
All
back.
right, sorry, that's my words.
Mr. Moore?
Thank you. I think there may be some confusion. In order to revamp the building, to revise the building, to refresh it, to put it back to its former glory, that's something the city can do, certainly, and probably the city would contract, when we'd hire somebody to do the work. But yes, the city would definitely be in charge of that. I think what the mayor was talking about is a user, like what's going to go in the building after it's been restored. The city, we don't want to be in the business of doing that. We want to find somebody who's going to run. What kind of a project do you want in there? I mean, it may be it may be a museum kind of thing. It may be an entertainment kind of thing. It may be a retail kind of thing. It may be office, whatever it is, but the city's not going to run whatever happens in there, but the city will certainly be involved, if not doing the work, the bulk of the work, or a lot of the work of restoring the building. That's what the city would do. Yes.
Thank you.
I think
Appreciate that.
Okay.
That helps. That helps. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Thank you, Mr. Braden. Anyone else? Thank you, Mayor Snyder. Moving on to item N, unfinished business. Do we have any unfinished business? Mr. Dracy?
I had stated that I would try to give an update on Quality Inn Hotel. Unfortunately, I've had 2 days that I was able to make calls and ended up with a heavy load of work. So the calls I made were very limited. I'm sure it's been heard and told that the owner is out of Texas currently, and he has several times filed with his insurance company to repair the damages that were caused to the building. And I've said several times that he is not going to get that money from his insurance company because that damage was done prior to him owning the building. He's holding on to this building for tax purposes as he holds on to, I believe, 12 other parcels throughout the country. So at this point, I'm going to start contacting the departments, the health department, fire department, building department, and find out what we can do about accelerating the citation process on that building in order to work on legal action and obtaining that building. It's been an eyesore since 2012, I want to say, and it's about time we do something since it's in the center of our city. So I'll continue working on it, see what I can do over the next week and a half, and see if I can come back with a better update.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Anyone else? Unfinished business? Anyone else? Then we'll move on to new business. Any new business? Mr. Tracy.
I'd like to ask that discussion on planters be placed into the Parks and Public Spaces Committee at the next meeting. I've been researching over the last week, I guess, how many planters would be needed from the north end to the south end along Montgomery Road. And I'm going to have a composite and a spreadsheet of how much that would cost.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Any other new business? Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you, Mr. President. First item, I just wanted to note the emergency operations plan and maybe, so we do have the Public Safety Committee here on council. I just want to make sure that there's no objections to the plan coming to council first before it goes to Public Safety Committee. If so, we just want to make sure we get that meeting scheduled before. The other item I have is for Boy Scout Ian Davis. He is working on his Eagle Scout program, or is getting his Eagle Scout, and he has been partnering with the city administration and the senior center people. He really has been focusing on that community center building. So they're working on getting a new sign out front, from my understanding. But one of the other project is to basically to clean out some of the, I think, the attic spaces at the building. So there's desks that have to get moved and a bunch of other stuff that have to get done. So he's calling for, he's kind of posted this on social media. This is July 17th and August 7th. So July 17th and August 7th from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. But he's looking to have 30 volunteers each day help to do some of the items that are needed at the community center. So there's a bunch of different places they're going to be working, apparently, it looks like. So lunch is being provided, it sounds like, from J&W Sandwich Shop, so thank you to them. And it's not even open on those days, so even nicer of them. Yeah. So anyways, long story short is it's, again, July 17th and August 7th, 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. So if you have any interest in helping this future Eagle Scout, please set some time on your calendar. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzo. Any other new business this evening? Mr. Tracy?
I guess I'll comment to the emergency plan. I mean, if it goes through Public Safety Committee, then it goes through. I guess, you know, at this point, we're just kind of making up our own game plan and our own rules. So I would like to see it go through it, yes. But if it doesn't, then not much I can do about it, so.
Thank you, Mr. Tracy. Anyone else? Any other new business? Mr. Kelch?
If I could I make a motion that we move back to council chambers?
Well, certainly you could. I think we were...
For our next meeting?
We were waiting on the air conditioning, I think was someone had said. Is that true?
I'm waiting.
Yeah, air conditioning was never not operational.
Oh, okay. Well, I thought that was what I heard.
That was one thing that I'd heard too.
Mr. Moore?
The mayor's court before the meeting, the day before the meeting, the air conditioning in council chambers was not operational. I'm just telling you, because I was there. And I think it may have been just temporary that day because they were working on something else, but if it's good, it's good. Great.
Come on, I need a win tonight, guys.
I checked it that morning.
So we had a motion by Mr. Kelch to return to City Hall, correct?
Yes.
Motion by Mr. Kelch to return to City Hall next meeting. Mr. Tracy?
Second that.
Any discussion? Is that your hand, Mr.?
Nope.
Oh,
sorry.
Okay. Mr. Bonzo?
Yeah, well, I just wanted to make sure, I mean, does anybody have any concerns with it operationally? Is there anything that works better here versus there? I mean, if there's no concerns, I mean, I don't have any concerns. And honestly, I think the NCT people, I think the way that their system works, it probably works better at council chambers. So, but I just wanted to throw it out there to make sure that Maria or anybody else didn't have any concerns.
I don't want to speak for Mrs. Williams, but I think she wants to go home.
Okay, cool.
Makes life much easier.
Does it? Okay, great.
All right. Well, then let's call the roll.
All right, Mr. Bonzo.
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard.
No.
Mr. Geraci.
Yes.
Mr. Kelch.
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo.
Yes.
Mr. Braden.
Sure. All members present, we have 5 ayes, 1 no. Motion passes. We're going to have the next meeting at City Hall. Mr. Braden?
Things, one's operational. That wasn't on the agenda. We just voted to have that on the agenda and then voted. That doesn't sound like that's something that was, for me, that wasn't on the agenda. It didn't seem like that was, I don't know. That's one thing. Secondly, I wanted to bring up, Mr. Bonzo, you spoke on it, but I wanted to thank our police chief, for coming tonight. I wanted to thank Officer David Frazel, and for his heroic efforts. And also wanted to thank Officer Robert Town and every other safety service official in our community who puts their lives on the line and goes and leaves their family and takes a chance every day for our safety. I want to thank them, and I appreciate them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. Any other new business? Ms. Kels?
With that, I would like to call Parks, Recreation, Public Spaces Committee meeting. That would be our regularly scheduled meeting. It's the second Wednesday of the month, and that would be July 14th, 7:30 in council chambers.
I'm sorry, was that 7:13 or 7:14?
7:30.
Oh,
Or
30.
the date, 7/14, July 14th.
Gotcha.
Thank you, Mr. Kels. Any other new business? Then we'll move on to communications. Communications P1, Mayor Victor Schneider, Mayor's Court Fines.
Letter dated June 4th, 2021, addressed to Ken Miracle, President. Mayor's Court Fines. Dear President and members of council, enclosed please find the report for Norwood Mayor's Court for the month of April 2021. Should you have any questions, please do not contact me, or excuse
Too bad.
do not hesitate to contact me. Sincerely, Victor Schneider, Mayor.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams.
Somebody honest.
Mr. Bonds.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we receive and file the communication.
Motion by Mr. Bonzel to receive and file the letter. May I have a second? Mr. DiNardo.
Second, please.
Any discussion, gentlemen? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item P2. City Auditor Jim Stiff regarding the May financial reports email. Mrs. Williams.
Letter dated June 14th, 2021, to Norwood City Council. Dear council members, this letter is to let you know that the May monthly financial reports were emailed to each council member on June 14th. If you have not received said email, please let me know so that I can verify your email address and get a copy of the reports to you as well. Sincerely, Kim Dallas, Account Clerk, Auditor's Office.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. Bonzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move we receive and file the letter.
Motion by Mr. Bonzel to receive and file. Mr. Braden.
Second.
Second by Mr. Braden. Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. Motion passes. Moving on to item P3. Tax Commissioner Chuck Barlow regarding the earnings tax collections report, May 2021.
I don't know that I have that one. Okay, now I do. Letter dated June 9th, 2021, to Norwood City Council. Dear member of council, attached are the earnings tax collection reports for May 2021. Respectfully, Chuck Barlow, Tax Commissioner, City of Norwood.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. Mr. DiNardo.
Please receive and file the letter.
Motion by Mr. DiNardo to receive and file the letter. May I have a second? Mr. Bonzel. Any discussion? Mr. Bonzel.
Thank you, Mr. President. The report that we have from the Treasurer's Office, I mean, it is good news. We've seen, at least over the last 3 months, over 10% over where we thought we would be. The thing is that we still have, with all of the health orders going away, and one of the health orders that's been really sustaining us has been people paying their earnings tax based on where they were before the pandemic started, not working from home. And so if there are employers in the city that still have people working from home, very soon we'll probably start seeing, within the next quarter, we'll start seeing likely some drop off in the earnings taxes that we are collecting. So just kind of want to make that note out there that, is as good as some of the news does look sometimes, that there's still a lot of uncertainty to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bonzel. Anyone else? Motion by Mr. DiNardo, second by Mr. Bonzel. Mrs. Williams?
You already read that, so please call the roll.
Mr. Bunzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, voting aye. Motion passes. Item P4, Board of Norwood Together regarding the Victory Park and Montgomery Road redevelopment plan. Mrs. Williams.
Letter dated June 17, 2021. To whom it may concern. Norwood Together was saddened to hear that there is confusion and misinformation surrounding what the recommendations are for Victory Park in the Montgomery Road redevelopment plan. We were among the groups that secured grant funding and served on the steering committee for this plan. Therefore, we thought it important to attempt to bring clarity to some of the issues that have been raised. The main confusion seems to stem from an architectural preliminary draft of the plan. This image was removed from the main narrative of the plan after public input sessions on November 15th and December 19th, 2020, where feedback about the image suggested it was confusing. The image was inadvertently left in a map of the entire Montgomery Road corridor in Appendix E of the final plan. We regret this clerical error and have provided the city and our website with a corrected map that no longer contains this image. The original image was not meant as a final design recommendation, but rather was intended to represent an updated park. But we acknowledge that images are by nature open to interpretation. Instead of speculating about the intent of a preliminary image, we thought it better to summarize what the text of the Montgomery Road redevelopment plan actually says about Victory Park. The words Victory Park appear 17 times in the plan, most of which are simply geographic references. The actual recommendations for actions can be found in 4 places in the plan, which we highlight below. Page 5 of the report in the executive summary states, the second location is Victory Park and the former Market House/Safety Lane building. A significant amount of community interest and energy is focused on that handsome former Market House/Safety Lane building in Victory Park. The proximity of Victory Park to the energy around the Sherman Avenue intersection also seems to make this area a logical place for investment and reinvention. The city is in talks with potential vendors that could utilize the Market House/Safety Lane building. Short-term actions at Victory Park include filling the pool, removing security fence, trimming and removing trees and landscaping. These improvements could open up the park and have it ready to complement operations in a repurposed Market House/Safety Lane building. In order for Victory Park to fully reach its potential, a landscape architect should be hired to develop a professional design for its rehabilitation. The city will also need to address perceived safety issues in the park. Other jurisdictions have used programming of events to help create inclusive space where all feel safe using an activated park. By keeping the park safe, clean, and programmed, it can become a strong asset to the Montgomery Road corridor. Page 17 continues. Reusing the Market House/Safety Lane building could help activate the park. Opening the park up, trimming trees, regrading, etc., could also help it to enhance the park and make it a green oasis in the middle of an area full of pavement and buildings. A table on page 27 summarizes 4 short-term recommendations for Victory Park. Fill the pool, remove the security fence, trim, remove trees, and landscape. Move storage out of Market House, obtain grant to hire a landscape architect, hold programs in the park. Page 28 has a medium-term recommendation for Victory Park. Implement landscape plan. It is clear that the misinformation around this topic has caused pain to Norwood veterans and others who care deeply about Victory Park. We apologize for any role we played in this. However, we want to be clear, moving or replacing existing memorials is not recommended or even mentioned as a possibility in the plan. Rather, the focus of the recommendations are to find ways to maximize the potential of this important park by investing more resources into the park, getting more people to use the park, and adding programming to unlock its potential as a hub for community activity. We believe these objectives are complementary to the purpose of honoring those who have served our country. Sincerely, the Board of Norwood Together.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. May I have a motion to receive and file? Mr. DiNardo?
Can you receive and file this letter, please?
Have a second? Mr. Briggs?
Second.
Any discussion? Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzel?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci? Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present, voting aye. The motion passes. Moving on to item Q, excuse absent members. Mr. Bonzo.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would move that we excuse the absent member.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo, may I have a second? Mr. Braden. Motion by Mr. Bonzo, second by Mr. Braden to excuse the absent member. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci? Oh, sorry, Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Sure.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
Yes, ma'am.
All members present voting aye. The absent member is excused. Moving on to item R, adjournment. May I have a motion for adjournment? Mr. Bonzo?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move we adjourn.
Mr. DiNardo?
Second, please.
Motion by Mr. Bonzo, second by Mr. DiNardo to adjourn. Please call the roll.
Mr. Bonzo?
Yes.
Mr. Gabbard?
Yes.
Mr. Geraci?
Yes.
Mr. Kelch?
Yes.
Mr. DiNardo?
Yes.
Mr. Braden?
All members present voting aye. We are adjourned.
That's side there, sir. I know.
Is that like the...
That was a